Let's recap this video tutorial on variables, which are containers for the data we're going to manipulate in our programs, with a very quick show how to set up a new project for a new solution by clicking on the new project button. Then the dialog box that appears here, make sure that you've got Visual C#, which is the language we're using, and console application, which is the type of application we're coding filled in. In the name section here, I'm going to set up a project name called variables. The location I'm going to use to store that is the default location for Visual Studio projects in the documents folder. That you can see the path to that shown here. Just cancel out of that. I'm going to leave it in there. And I'll click OK. Now we have our solution with our project set up. Of course, you can see the program.cs file available within that project folder, and now open inside the editor, so we can start coding, of course, inside the braces or curly brackets of the main method here. First thing I'm going to do is set up a variable. So type along with me, don't forget to pause if required. This variable type is integer, so this line of code is setting up storage for an integer called x and another integer called y. Make sure you follow along, make sure you're an active learner here. So all I'm doing here is setting up code so that I can set up two containers, as you can see here, called x and y, and the kind of value that can go into those containers is called an integer. Okay, so integers, you may remember from your maths class, are whole numbers, positive and negative whole numbers between a certain large number range. So for example, if you're to do a program with currency where you're dealing with cents and decimal points, the integer data type may not be suitable for you. So all we're doing here is setting up those integers, setting aside these containers in memory so that you can start putting values into them and manipulating them. We have those integers set up. We have the storage space set aside to put something into x and y. And you'll notice here, having declared or set up the integer, that the Visual Studio IDE is giving us a message here with a little green line there, warning us that the variable x is declared but never used. And the same for the integer y. So let's start using these variables with some code. So I'll do a little bit of arithmetic. X equals 7, semicolon, and y equals x plus 5. So a little bit of basic algebra there to get us started. So the first line of code, x equals 7, just gets the value 7 and puts it inside the container for the variable x. And the second line of code here says for get the container y and put x plus 5 into that container. Now I'm just going to add some more code to display my outcome to the screen. So I'm going to type in console. You'll notice here I'm going to pick up on something called IntelliSense. There's suggestions here that pop up when I start typing the word console underneath. And I can scroll up and down with these using the arrow keys and use the enter key on my keyboard to complete that word console. And then again, dot, right line. And I can scroll down to right line with a down arrow and hit enter to finish that. And then just open my brackets and open my string literal, and instead of a string literal here, I'm just going to put the value of what's stored in y. That's what's going to be displayed to the screen. And again, console, hit enter, dot, readline, and open and close brackets and close semicolon. So try and get in that habit yourself of practice again, pause this video if necessary, of just using IntelliSense, using your arrow keys, using the enter key to auto-complete some of these commands. One of the other possible benefits is that you're less prone to errors. For example, if I'm typing out readline, you might accidentally not capitalize the L in readline. The IntelliSense, by completing the read line for you, You'll notice here if I start using it again, it does it with the correct capitalization, the correct spelling and so on. So using IntelliSense effectively not only should make you quicker in the long run, but it should make you more accurate with your coding as well. When we execute the code console.writeline y, it's going to go into the container y. It's going to ask what's the value in y, and then you're going to pull out the value that's currently stored in that container we know is x plus 5. So then obviously you're saying to yourself, what's in x? And you pull the value out of the container x for what's in x, and you put that in, and you know that 7 plus 5 is equal to 12. So we should display 12 on the screen when the program is run. Let's just go up here and execute and see if the program runs as expected. You can see console.writeline y displays the value of y on the screen, which is 12. Okay, I'm going to comment out this line of code with the integer x. There's a few ways we can do this. One is just by using the backslash on your keyboard on the line of code, and that comments it out. Another method is you can just go to the relevant line of code and on the toolbar select the button to comment out that line of code, which effectively does the same thing. When I comment out the line of code with int x in it, you'll notice the the variable x has not been declared. So a bit of confusion arises when you start to try and use that integer in your program. It indicates it has no context, you haven't declared it, you haven't set up this area of memory. So let's take out the comment there and fix that issue. Okay, I'm going to move on to dealing with a different type of variable called string. So I no longer need this variable code. So I can comment out that entire block of code by selecting it and using the toolbar. Another I'll just use the on comments button here to take out those comments. Another method you can use for commenting out an entire block of code is by using backslash and star at the beginning of a block of code, and then at the end of a block of code by using asterisk or star and backslash again. And then you can go and start coding from the next line on. So in this code again, we're going to display a message this time prompting the user to enter their first name. Again, get pausing and copy me and try and use IntelliSense. Then we're going to set up a variable to store this first name, but this time instead of an integer, you can see there's a keyword here, string. So this is a string variable that we're setting up here, and we're going to call it my first name. Okay, I'm going to call it something meaningful here. If we could call this just x, you know, you could confuse it with, or it might be, it's not very human readable code. So I've called it my first name. And you'll notice the camel case here, capital F and the capital M, that camel case method makes that code, because no spaces are allowed when you're naming a variable, it makes it more human readable as well. So you've set up that string, and now I'm going to set things up so that string can be read in by the user. So we're going to set the value for my first name. You can see IntelliSense does the trick there for us. Is going to become equal to console.readline. So whatever is input by the user on the screen now is stored in that variable. Same thing again, we're going to do another 3 lines of code, console.writeline, and we're going to ask or prompt the user to enter their surname. And this time we're going to set up a variable again. Actually, I'm going to do 2 lines of code in 1 line here. I'm going to set up my surname, and I'm going to read it in from the console. Console.readline. So you can see above here for the first name, we declared the variable first name, set aside the memory, and then in a separate line of code we initialize that variable by taking in the value from the keyboard. We've done those 2 lines of code here in just one line by declaring and initializing the variable all in one go here. So computer programmers are always trying to find more efficient ways of writing coding in less lines, if you like. So try and do that where it's possible. And it's also a very good habit that if you are setting up a variable to initialize it straight away, or to get a value into that variable straight away and get it stored in memory. Now we're going to write out a message saying hello to the user on the screen. So it's console.writeLine again, and write in the word hello. And you want to add the user's first name here. So when you are using operators, the plus operator on arithmetic here, you're adding numbers up. But when you're using it on a string, you're doing something different. You're concatenating it, so you're making that string longer, which you'll see in a minute. So we're going to say hello, my first name. Then you're going to add in a space, and then you're going to add your surname in there at the end, and just finish the statement. And of course, finish here with a console.readline, open close brackets and close semicolon. So it's gonna, let's look at that again. I'm gonna say hello, followed by my first name, followed by space, followed by my surname. So concatenate just makes the string longer, or adds items to the string and makes it a longer string. Whereas the plus operator is an addition or arithmetical addition when you're dealing with integers. So you'll notice sometimes that different operators behave differently depending on the data type that's being used. Let's try and visualize what's happening here. So the first thing that happens there is you're asked for your first name on the console. A variable is set up and we assign the name to that variable, my first name. Then the user is prompted to type on the screen their first name. So it says, what is your first name? So I type on the screen, Brendan, and the console.readline command is set to be equal to my first name. So the name Brendan is stored in the my first name variable. Then you're asked for your surname. We set up the variable, my surname. The user is prompted to type in their surname. I'm going to type in O'Sullivan, and that is stored in my surname variable. Then finally the program writes out a message out to the screen. First thing it writes is hello. That's written out to the screen. Then, or out to the console. Then at the end of hello it asks what's inside that variable, my first name. And of course, if you go to the my first name variable, we pull out the name Brendan. So it says hello, Brendan. Then we add to that a space with the concatenate symbol. So it says hello, Brendan. We have a space there. And then after that space, we're going to add what's in my surname, which is O'Sullivan. So the message you should get displayed on the screen is hello, Brendan O'Sullivan. One small item there before I finish off the tutorial, and that's in reference to the case sensitive nature of C#. You'll see here the variable here, my first name. If I was to bring that out of camel case here and just make it all lowercase, you can see it doesn't match, or flagged here that my first name doesn't exist because the camel case version doesn't match the all lowercase version. So I'll just fix that again by putting it back in camel case when it's declared, and now it matches it when it's being used later on to be read in from the user and to be output to the console at a later stage in the code. Another item worth noting as well is once a variable is declared, it shouldn't be declared again. So for example here, if I was to redeclare my next variable here as my first name, it gets flagged here by saying that a local variable named my first name is already defined. So make sure that the variables are unique, that you have some sort of standard like camel case so that you don't get things mixed up, and make sure they're not repeated. Okay, so there's a few good tips when you're using your variables. So I'll just fix that issue there again and make sure that the code runs according to how it is shown in the visual. So far so good. We're prompted to enter my first name followed by my surname, and when I enter that, the greeting message, hello Brendan O'Sullivan, is output, and then hit enter again to exit execution of the program. So a few very important things learned there, lots of new stuff, so it might be worth replaying and going through this video again. We learned about two new data types: the integer data type, which is whole numbers; the string data type, which is any list of characters in a row. We learned about operators, the important assignment operators. When you use the equal sign, you store whatever is after the equals inside the variable that's listed below, or sorry, before the equal sign. Then the plus operator, when used with integers or numbers, is a normal arithmetic add. However, when it's used with a string data type, it behaves differently. It acts as a concatenate. We also learned about IntelliSense and how to use that effectively using the arrow keys and the down keys to save your time and to make you more accurate when you're coding. And we also learned the importance of using good names for variables that make sense and that are human readable, and the effective use of camel case, because you can't use spaces when you're naming variables as well. We learned about that too. Time to quiz yourself. Don't forget to pause here and answer the question yourself prior to me revealing the answer, to try and test yourself and be a better learner. So what is a bucket in memory used to store or retrieve data known as across all programming languages? C, Sharp, Java, etc. And the answer there is variable. So I've called it a container or a bucket in my tutorial as I've been talking. What is output to the console after running the following code? So let's have a look here at the code. I have an integer x and y. I'm storing 25 in the integer x, and then in the next line of code gets whatever's in x, take away 30, and then I just output that value y to the console. Let's look here in the first line of code. You can see that we store the value 25 into the variable container x. Then we store x minus 30 into the variable container y. So then when we execute the line of code here to display y in the console, you can see out of the variable container of y, we have x minus 30. So we ask that container x, what's in there? And we can see 25 replaces x, that's what goes in there. So the what's displayed on the console is the value of 25 minus 30. So minus 5 or negative 5 should be displayed on the console here. And there you can see the code here done up in Visual Studio and being executed, and the console outputs negative 5. What is output to the console after running the following code? So string x equals hello, string y equals world, and then a new string z is set up, which concatenates x plus y and output to the console. So the visual of the code here you can see is setting up a string called x and initializing that straight away with hello. So we'll pop that value into our variable x, initializing, so declaring and initializing a variable y and populating it with world, and then initializing, declaring a variable, again a string variable called x, and getting what's in x, which is hello, what's in y, which is world, and concatenating those two together and storing it in z. So then finally you write out the value of z to the console, so you extract those two together, so hello world from z, and you output that to the console. It should be hello world, no spaces. So you'll notice here as I'm writing my code here, I have a problem with world here, which when it's written out you get a message there indicating that This is a string and it's been declared as an integer, so the problem is when I declared that variable or set aside the memory, I set aside something suitable for an integer, so I'll make sure that's written as string. And let's execute the code and make sure it executes as I have indicated in my visual. No spaces, output to the console. Final question. What will be output to the console when the following code is run? So we declare a string called x, a string called y, and then add them together. And is the value 5 is the question. 23, 2 plus 3 or 6? So the answer here, 23. Seems strange here that you're adding 2 plus 3 and getting 23. So let's see why that happens in Visual Studio. Here's my program executing in Visual Studio, and you can see the verifying that I get 2 and a 3 here for the answer, because you've declared everything as a string. And you'll notice here when you're declaring an integer, so if I was to set up an integer, in my code here, called A, and I was stored a number 2 in the integer, you'll notice that that integer would come without any quote marks around it. So that's how you know it's handling the number as a string as opposed to it being a number that will add up to 5 as you might expect. So the number 2 has number 3 added to the end of it, and it's stored in a string called z, and when it's output to the screen then it becomes 23.